we are in course 2 of Grain School 2022, and we've started talking about biodiversity last week, and this is kind of an interesting conundrum that we talk about biodiversity and nutrition, but as we already understand, biodiversity matters in nutrition and health, and we try to make a deep connection with diversity of crops, particularly grains, and now today also maize or corn. And in the past, and also your modules are going deeply into the history and culture of Mexico and nixtamalization, particularly from a nutritional perspective, and making tortillas and other culinary treats from nixtamalized corn. But what we have not had in the past so well represented is the Southwest. And I'm just very, very grateful for both Mark Varien and Stewart Koyiyumptewa, I hope I say this correctly, to be here with us and to be able to enlighten us and provide us insight into the importance of the Four Corners region and the history and culture of maize in the Southwest. And so today our guests are Mark Varien, who's a archaeologist and current executive vice president of the Research Institute at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center in southwestern Colorado in Cortez. In this position, he works with the Crow Canyon staff to further the center's mission. And the mission is to empower present and future generations by making the human past accessible and relevant through archaeological research, experimental education, and American Indian knowledge. I shared with you many of the content areas from Crow Canyon. It's just amazing what has happened in the past and currently with the knowledge accumulated and just the way the Crow Canyon Center is providing this outreach to the community. So thank you for this work. Mark is an expert in anthropology and has his Ph.D. from Arizona State University. I have my master's from Arizona State University and almost a little earlier than you, 1995. And his dissertation won the Society of the American Archaeological Best Dissertation Award in 1998. So this is very, very special. He's also the author of many books and journal articles. So thank you, Mark, for being here. And I know you're going to take the lead, but I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to meet Stewart. It's wonderful to have you with us at Grain School. And Stewart is from the village of Hotevilla on the Third Mesa on the Hopi Nation's lands. He's a member of the Bachelor clan. He serves as the program manager for the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office. He co-authored the book, The Hopi People. He also co-edited Moquis and Kastiilam, Hopis, Spaniards, and the Trauma of History, and the recently published award-winning book, Becoming Hopi, A History. We're very honored to have you both with us. And I think the plan is now that we switch to Mark and give him the screen and the microphone and let him introduce the topic of the Southwest. Thank you.
Sure, I'll share my screen, but while I'm doing that, maybe Stewart can unmute. And it's Stewart Koyiyumptewa. He's been a great colleague and friend for many years, and I'll just let Stewart wave and say hi to people as I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody on the call. Again, my name is Stewart Koyiyumptewa. I was born and raised on the Hopi Reservation. I also attended the local school system out there, and then eventually got my undergrad from the University of Arizona. And also did some graduate work at Northern Arizona University. And thank you for having me. Kwakwa. Kwakwa means thank you in Hopi, the masculine version. There's a different thank you for female. So kwakwa, everybody.
Thank you, Stewart. So Stewart and I will be speaking today about 2 projects we've worked on together. The first is the founding project is called the Pueblo Farming Project, or sometimes I'll just call it the PFP. And this is a collaboration between the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office and Crow Canyon. And the goal, the general goal of the project, is to better understand Pueblo maize or corn farming, past and present. And I'll use those words interchangeably, maize and corn. The project was co-designed by Crow Canyon and the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office. The PFP led to another project that's more recent, and that's called the Maize Database Project, which was also designed with Hopi under Stewart's leadership. And we'll be talking a little bit about that project in the second half of this talk. Here's a picture of the Crow Canyon campus where I work. It's in southwestern Colorado, just outside of the town of Cortez. That's Sleeping Ute Mountain in the background, a really iconic peak of the Four Corners. Crow Canyon has students of all ages, starting with fourth graders and up to folks in their 80s, who, at least before the pandemic, traveled to our campus and would help us with our research that we conduct through these public education programs, and often in partnership with Native educators. So here is a picture. I think we're looking at Second Mesa there, Hopi, or Stewart, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And I don't know if people can see it in the picture, but there's actually two villages on top of those two buttes on top of the mesa in the middle distance. Which villages are those, Stewart?
On the far left, as you're looking at, it's a village called Sapaulavi, and on the far right is a village called Musangnivi. And the little escarpment that you see down is an ancestral village. That little escarpment down on the right-hand side is called Corn Rocks. Yeah.
This one?
Yes.
That's Corn Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. So I don't know if you can see the map, but it shows the location of, in the lower right-hand corner, it shows the location of Crow Canyon in southwest Colorado. And it's in the what archaeologists call the Mesa Verde region, named after the landform Mesa Verde, where Mesa Verde National Park is located. And it arguably, southwest Colorado has the highest density of archaeological sites anywhere in the United States, about 100 sites per square mile in some areas. So the Hopi villages are about 200 miles southwest, and they're on the southern end of a landform that actually has the same geology as Mesa Verde. That landform's called Black Mesa today. There's a Hopi name for it, I think, that's different than that. But this shows the Hopi lands today and the villages. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what constitutes the villages that constitute Hopi today, Stewart.
Yes, the Hopi, there are 12 autonomous villages on the Hopi tribal lands, and each of them have their own separate governments, some traditional and some modern type of government. So only a handful of villages sent representatives to the government function of the tribal council. In other villages, such as the village from where I come from, and my family, my wife and family, we come from Hotevilla, is considered a traditional village, as well as Lower Munkapi. If you can, at the far left of the map, there's a place called Munkapi, both upper and lower, two villages in that vicinity. The lower village is a traditional village that does not send representatives to the tribal council, as well as Oraibi, what maps identify as Old Oraibi, and Songopavi. So there's only a handful of what I'm calling traditional villages that do not send representation to the modern form of government, and that's for reasons in terms of their traditional and cultural belief systems. So,
thanks, Stewart. Well, the Pueblo Farming Project began when Crow Canyon was doing what's called a NAGPRA consultation with Hopi about a new archaeological research project. We were, if we got permission, we're going to begin, called the Goodman Point Archaeological Project. And that was in 2005. NAGPRA stands for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is a law that was passed in 1990 and that was long overdue, that gave the affiliated tribes more say in any projects that took place on federal land that involved the ancestral sites of Native people. So we did those consultations on this project, and when we finished, I turned to this gentleman who was at that time the director of the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office, the position that Stewart holds today. His name is Lee Kuwanwisiwama. And I turned to him and his staff that were in the room, and I said, we went through all this consultation, and I said, well, is there something in this research design is there something besides this research design that Hopi would want Crow Canyon to study? And Lee didn't even hesitate. He said, yes, corn and corn farming. And he did this because corn is so central to Hopi culture. So this next short video is going to be Lee talking about the importance of corn to Hopi people. And then I'll ask Stewart to expand on that.
Corn is a gift to the Hopi people, and it's our symbol of being Hopi. Corn, of course, became part of the culture. Growing up into the corn culture, you just basically learn that if you respect the environment and the earth, then both will help you with what you have to do to survive.
So, Stewart, do you want to expand on that and talk a little bit about the importance of, or whatever you think about the relationship between Hopi culture and corn?
Yeah, we consider ourselves, the Hopi people, the Hopi culture, as a corn culture. So corn, or maize, if you will, has its roots as far as our migration histories, where we first stepped foot into the Four Corners region. And yeah, so our folklore, or our traditional stories, tell that you know, when migrating groups were coming into what we know to be Hopi tribal lands, there was already a person that was living there. And I think this picture depicts that person, and he was a what we call a dry farmer, or a rain farmer, really industrious, knowledgeable about the land, the soils, the landscape, water resources. And he knew that people were going to start coming in to the area, and he I guess asked the migrating clans to go out and make their footprint meaning make your mark on the landscapes within the Four Corners area through building homes with rock, because wood will eventually erode or go back into the earth. Make your mark on walls, cliffs, that's petroglyphs, and then also you know, purposefully break your pottery wares and when you're leaving a location, so that those pottery wares that are broken will leave evidence. One of the other things, you know, way before that is he had an experience with different types of groups that were seeking permission to inhabit the land. And so he kind of did a test to the different groups. He laid out different ears of corn on the ground surface there. And there were, different groups such as Ute and Anglo people, different types of people, that became these people. So he told the leaders of these different groups of people, whatever corn that you choose will dictate or show the kind of life that you will have in the future. So he laid out all different kinds of corn, which would represent the lifestyle that these people would live in the future. And so there was, of course, very beautiful ears of corn that was laid on the ground, and some not so beautiful. Of course, the participants and the people who are to become these different types of groups and people were like eyeing which one they're going to grab once he says go. So they already kind of picked beforehand what corn they were going to choose, and then as soon as he said go, they all rushed forward and tried to grab the most beautiful, the strongest, the toughest, but the Hopi people, they say, didn't do that. They just stayed back and waited for the dust to settle, and all that was left for the Hopi people to choose was the short blue ear of corn, not so pretty, and just short. And from our stories, that by choosing that meant that Hopi people were going to live a life of hard work but rewarding, meaning that the corn will be able to grow anywhere in a semi-arid environment. And I don't know, I do believe that the rain, yearly precipitation that the Hopi received was probably quite more than what we get. Now we get about 10 inches of rain a year because of climate change. So aside that, that blue corn also symbolized, and it was a metaphor for all different types of plants, all different types of varieties of corn, beans, squash, and later on some Hopi, what we're calling Hopi melons. It's kind of hard to grow food out at home, but the Hopi people perfected that way of life and continue to do so today.
That's great, Stewart. Thank you. Well, we came back from that 2005 meeting, and we just had a general instruction, study corn and corn farming, but we didn't really, in our 2005 meeting at Hopi, specify how to do that. So I wrote a grant and got some money to hold the planning meeting to discuss, to bring various Pueblo farmers to Crow Canyon, along with 3 Anglos who study Pueblo corn farming, and discuss how to do that. And there were farmers from Hopi, Jemez Pueblo, Okeyewinge Pueblo, Tasuki Pueblo, and these 3 Anglo scholars that I mentioned. And we met for 2 days. And at the end of our meeting, and this shows that group in this picture, and some of us at the bottom at our meetings, and then the group on top being out on the landscape, looking at the landscape and talking about how it would do. So at the end of that 2-day meeting, the Pueblo farmers decided 2 things: that the way we should study corn is to conduct an experimental farming project in the Mesa Verde region. And that's because all of these Pueblo farmers view the Mesa Verde region as their ancestral homeland. And they really wanted to know if their farming methods would work in their ancestral lands. The farmers also decided, even though they came from a bunch of different Pueblos, except for Hopi, most of those were Pueblos on or near the Rio Grande, and they all practice irrigation farming today. And they decided that because we think the ancestral Pueblo farmers in the Mesa Verde region practice rain farming with no irrigation, like Stewart was just describing, that Hopi should take the lead on this project, and that because we wouldn't be irrigating, we would be dry farming, and the Hopi were acknowledged as the most expert in dry farming. So we wrote another grant, and Hopi farmers came to Crow Canyon, a group of them, in 2007. We had asked the National Park Service if they would let us establish experimental fields at the Goodman Point unit of Hovenweek National Monument, and they said no. So we decided to locate our gardens and our experimental plots on Crow Canyon's campus. And these farmers came, and they used their traditional ecological knowledge to select the areas to locate these gardens. And that included looking at native plants on the landscape and which native plants might signal the best areas for farming. And they also, you can see in that upper right-hand corner, they pick up the soil and evaluate the soil. But Stewart, I don't know if you had anything to say about the ecological knowledge that Hopi people use to decide where a good field would be located.
Yeah, when a Hopi person decides that they want to conduct or establish a new field outside from their family fields, they often look at the lay of the land, the ground, what types of plants are growing in the area that they want to put in their hard work to get rid of some of the plants there. So plants are a good indicator that will determine if an area will be a good field. And there are certain types of plants that is more successful, such as corn, and there's other plants that are more indicators that beans and other plants are indicators where watermelon and squash will be good, will turn out a good yield. So it's if it all determines based on what the person is wanting to plant, and they'll go out in the landscape and look at the plants and the soils, and they'll finally decide this is the place where I want to put my effort in clearing the land, also using fire to clear the area and put their hard work in to clear a field. And I haven't seen any, because of this technique, I haven't seen any areas where people have chosen to be not successful. There are areas on the landscape that you'll see, why aren't people farming here? It's because it lacks those different plant species that are good indicators of how your crops will do in a given area.
Well, I know one plant they mentioned they were looking for when they walked around Crow Canyon's campus was rabbit brush, or some people call it chamisa, and they didn't find it. So they picked the best areas they could find on our campus, but I don't think they regarded the places where we established our gardens as what they would consider the very best. I think they thought they were okay, but not possibly the best. So we located 5 gardens on our campus. This is looking across the Crow Canyon drainage. And you can see we also installed temperature monitors. The rectangles show where the fields were located. And there were 5 of those that cut across the drainage. so we could evaluate things like the effect of cold air drainage on the growing season and other things we were interested in monitoring. We eventually abandoned 2 of the gardens and settled on 3 gardens on campus. One of the things we think we know from looking at where the ancestral pueblo, the old archaeological and ancestral sites are located, is they're usually on the mesa top, on these deep windblown soils that's called either the Mesa Verde loess or the Dove Creek loess. And that soil has blown up into Southwest Colorado from around where Monument Valley is, sort of closer to Hopi. And that's been happening for the last 15,000 years. And it turns out that soil is the perfect texture for holding soil moisture. So we think that most of the, or at least a large percentage of the fields would have been on the mesa tops. But our mesa top field didn't do very good. It was a field not that the Hopi farmers picked, but that a real prominent ethnobotanist, Karen Adams, picked in the late 1980s. And we just reopened that field, but it never did very good. So we wanted a field on the mesa tops, and we went to this gentleman. His son is an archaeologist at Crow Canyon, but his name is Mike Coffey. And as a part of our very first trip, you can see the Hopi, the Pueblo farmers visiting with Mike on the left there. And his farm is about 30 miles northwest of Crow Canyon. And whereas we're at 6,200 feet, we asked Mike if he would pick a location that he thought was the best place for to grow corn. And he did that for us. And I just close this comment by saying it was really amazing to take the Pueblo farmers out there, because they just immediately spoke the same language as farmers with Mike. And it was really fun to watch them as farmers interact with each other. Today we have the 3 campus gardens and what we call the Mike Coffey Garden out on his farm. One of our gardens on campus we call the Check Dam Garden. The Hopi selected it partly because it was in a drainage, which I'll show you in a minute, and the sagebrush was much taller because it gets more moisture. And when we cleared that field, we found the remains of an ancient check dam in that garden. So we think it's actually a place that ancestral Pueblo people farmed centuries ago. And this is a picture of a really good year when we did get rainfall and the corn growing in the check dam garden. We have another garden that's on the high end of a drainage, and it produced the first couple of years, but it hasn't produced much since then. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but that's called the Pueblo Learning Center Garden. It would take an extremely wet year for this garden to produce. By the way, that wild plant that you see growing next to that corn plant is the native tobacco that grows in this region, and that we grow and give to our friends at Hopi. Then our last garden on campus is called Paul's Old Garden, because an educator at Crow Canyon established this garden earlier to teach Crow Canyon students so they could see corn growing, and we could teach Crow Canyon students about corn. It's down in the bottom of the drainage, so it's the one that's the most affected in years when we get an early or late frost. So here's an aerial view of those 3. The CDG is the check dam garden, and you can see how it's in that cluster of larger sagebrush. If I had it to do over, I might move it a little bit further down that drainage, and it would be really interesting. We've never cleared that drainage to where when it rains, the water would actually flow in there, and the check dams were designed to slow the water movement and also allow more sediments to accumulate so that the soil profile's deeper. You can see how the Pitt House Learning Center garden is further up in that drainage to the left, and how Paul's Old Garden is in the drainage down at the bottom. Finally, here's a picture of Mike Coffey's garden. He gave us a spot right in the middle of one of his fields that he either typically grows beans in or grows winter wheat in, which is what you see in this picture. Those are the Blue Mountains. That's what locals call them. Most people would call those the Abajo Mountains that are in the background over in southeastern Utah. near the area that you may have heard of that's been in the news a lot lately, the Bears Ears area. But you can see how well the Mike Coffee Garden does. So wrote another grant, brought the farmers back to plant and harvest. Our first year of planting and harvesting was 2008. And this is a picture of our group after our first harvest on the left. And these are all the Hopi farmers that have participated in the project between 2008 and the present. And just can't tell you from my perspective how amazing and what an honor it's been to work with these people and all that they've taught us about traditional Hopi farming practices. And beyond that, the importance of corn to Hopi culture and just a whole different way of relating to food than our society typically does. I'd also point out that the four gentlemen on the upper row on the left, Morgan Sufke, Raleigh, Owen, and Harold are no longer with us. And man, it was just so amazing to work with those elders. Stewart, I don't know if you have anything to say about what it would have been like for Morgan and Raleigh and Owen and Harold when they were kids. Like what would corn and corn farming have been like for them as they were growing up, and how did they learn it, and how much of a part of their life would it have been growing up?
Yeah, I it's kind of hard to kind of think what they might have been experiencing, but I'll reflect on what my grandfather used to have to discipline himself. He was a federal employee as a tree marker with the United States Forest Service, so he only had time to tend to his field on the weekends. But growing up, there's stories about how our uncles would and their uncles would come and get them very early in the morning, not when even the sun wasn't up and it was still kind of dark, and they would trek down, because we live on mesas and our fields are on the bottom of the mesas, and they would literally have to walk to their fields while it's still nice and cool, and work until probably it's starting to get more warm, and then head back up to their homes for a lunch and kind of rest, and then trek back down to the fields and work. It was a process like that for every day, and then sometimes you have to sleep in your fields because especially when the corn is getting ripe, ready to bring home, when the ears are beginning to fill, that's when a lot of other animal creatures will come in. Deer, elk, bear, coyotes will try to come in and partake of your hard work. So we families have to take turns sleeping down in the field to protect your hard work, and so it's very hard, and some of the more traditional farmers will their discipline was to not drink of water until they actually came home at the Hopi noon hour, which is probably somewhere between 1 and 2. And then they would head straight to not their homes, but to our what we call kiva, our ceremonial chambers, smoke and pray for rain, and then go to their home to rest. So it was a process of being true to your farm and treating your farm and plants as family members. So it's a tedious process, especially when you don't have the ability to irrigate your fields and direct water to your corn. So it's a different method. There has to be a lot of faith and prayer involved in dry farming or rain farming, if you will.
Yeah, the Hopi farmers always told us that even more important than rain was what you had in your heart when you came to your field, and bringing a good heart to your field when you went to work in your field. The Hopi farmers, that first year, 2008, these are the varieties of corn that they brought up. There's actually more varieties than these, but that's what they showed up with. And for the first 3 years, we planted different varieties. The researcher at Crow Canyon who'd done a lot of, he did his MA thesis on experimental gardens. His name was Ben Bellarato. He actually wanted to grow different varieties in the same plot to see how different varieties did under the same conditions. But the Hopi farmer said, oh, we would never do that. And that has to do with maintaining the integrity of these varieties, I think. But do you have anything to say about all these different varieties that are still present at Hopi today, Stewart?
Yes, like Mark said, this isn't the full variety, but the picture that you see here, white, there's different types of blue, and blue can also be gray. There's the yellow, and a lot of these corn varieties are used not only for subsistence, but also for ceremony. So we have different corns that represent our cardinal direction in Hopi, and it's not the true north-south cardinal direction that we use in our phones or compasses. The Hopi people's cardinal directions are in the middle of the two cardinal directions, meaning our directions are northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. So it's opposite or kind of different from modern cardinal directions. And each of these corn and up and down represent those cardinal directions, and are heavily influenced in also the types of food that you can prepare. A lot of times you see the supai corn depicted there. It will be used for parched corn because it tends to get soft when it's cooked. And then you have your sweet corn and white corn that's used for pasoli, or I don't know the term. And then you have your blue corns that are used for flour and the like. So there's other corn that is good for pudding, and so it's good to have a variety of these on hand. And I just wanted to mention that there is an unwritten rule in Hopi where the corn belongs to the male when it's in the male's cornfield. Once the corn is brought and handed over to your wife or female relatives, it now belongs to them to take care of. So even though you put in all your hard work in raising the corn, you have to ask permission from your wife if you want to use it in any way. And it's the wife that chooses which corn that will be planted with the next year's planting season. So there's all kind of cultural rules in terms of corn and the different varieties that you see.
So Stewart, I have to ask, Nana showed that beautiful turquoise corn at the beginning, and I know when I first started emailing with her and her husband Dan, they mentioned they grew Hopi varieties, and they actually wanted to connect with Hopi farmers to talk about the seed and possible sharing and maintaining of varieties. And they said that they grow that Hopi turquoise. I've never seen that turquoise as a Hopi variety. Do you recognize that as a Hopi variety?
I didn't recognize it because it was kind of too blue.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Yeah, so but
that's interesting, isn't it? Well, we'll talk more about that later. when we all meet face to face someday up here in Southwest Colorado.
Yeah, it looks,
Well,
sorry, it looks
yeah,
to me,
please.
it almost looks to me like the speckled, perhaps. And I was also just asking Dan, who came up with turquoise anyway. It's called Hopi turquoise, but we're not sure. Maybe Dan, I think Dan is on here too, but it might look similar to that speckled.
Yeah, and I want to say, I mentioned to say, Nana, that, Stewart and I get on a roll, and I'm not sure we'll get through this whole presentation, but that's okay. But if y'all want to interrupt with questions or anytime, feel free to jump in. We did, after 3 years, settle on just blue and white, because we wanted to just have 2 varieties so we could have more consistency from year to year in looking at our yields relative to these varieties. But I want to play a video next. It's short, but it will show Owen, who you can see in the upper picture on the left, and Harold planting a particular clump, just to show you the traditional technique of planting with a planting stick that I think in the Hopi language, it's called a soya. Stewart can correct me if I got that wrong, but here you go with this video. So I'm going to turn this over to Stewart too, but there's actually, it looked pretty simple and they're doing this without thinking about it, but it's actually like how they dig that hole, how deep they dig it, how many seeds they put in each hole. And then the way that they put the dirt back in, like they're doing it, it may not have looked like there was a method to that, but they're actually putting the dirt that came out last, that's the most moist, back in first. And then you saw at the end, Harold drag that dust on top that sort of acts like a dust mulch. But there are many techniques that the Hopi have developed to allow them to have successful harvests in a place. Stewart mentioned 10 inches of rain with climate change. Maybe it was 14 in the past. That's still not much. And yet they would produce successful harvests. So Stewart, I wondered if you could talk about some of the techniques that are most important for successful dry or rain farming.
Yeah, the method that you saw are who we call Hoyiyumptewa. His name is Harold, but Hoyiyumptewa is known by his Hopi name in the village from where we're from, Hotevilla. He's from Hotevilla. And then you have Owen. Dry farming or traditional Hopi farming is really a tedious task. It all depends on how much snowfall that we receive on a given season. So right now we're coming into spring, and what Hopi people pray for during the winter months is abundance of snow in multiple increments. And what we hope is that the snow will fall, melt, and then a hard freeze comes so that the moisture will penetrate the earth and then freeze and stay frozen until the spring when it's ready to be used. So the planting implement, the tool is made from greasewood. That's one of our hardest plant substances out at Hopi, and we use that. And the depth of how far you go depends on the moisture level. So for instance, you see in the picture, it looks like the depth of moisture isn't really too deep, and farmers will go part way and then dig out the soil. And then also depending on past experiences, they'll determine how much seeds to put in. farmers will put in from anywhere from 8 to 20 seeds. And 20 may be a lot, and you see in the picture, it's kind of looks like it's hairy, a bushy head, but that will eventually be thinned out to a manageable size. About 5 to 7 plants will be left from that 20. And also, the reason why you plant a whole bunch of seeds is that we in our area have cutworms, and cutworms will usually take the entire plant out by cutting straight through the young shoots. That's what they like. So it's important that we go hunt for these cutworms around our young shoots. And it's not common to see to pick out anywhere from 5 to 15 cutworms out of one single plant. And so it's hard work, it's backbreaking work. If you're not used to getting up and down, you're going to be sore the next day or that afternoon. And all the meanwhile, you hum or sing, because we consider plants to be our family members, especially children. So, and we try not to partake of water around the plants, because they're suffering too, because they're not getting any moisture. And usually we plant around May, and the monsoons don't hit our area until mid-July. So there's a good month and a half where the plant is struggling for moisture, some nourishment. And once those monsoons hit, they're likely to just run, meaning grow, because there's humidity in the air, and they finally get to drink if the rain hits the field. So one of the things that I know about corn too is that it has these protective mechanisms built in the plant. So in the summer, during the noon hour all the way up till around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it gets so hot that the leaves on the plants that you see will actually shrivel up, and they'll look like needles. It's an awkward sight to have your leaves of your corn kind of protect itself from the elements by covering itself up. So, and then when the sun goes down, then the leaves will open up back. The plants, Hopi plants, sure like the morning, because it's the time when the dew is present in the air, and sometimes will make connection with the land. So and you dig until you reach moisture. So it's not unusual for farmers to plant a foot or more deep into the ground. And our seeds are so adapted to that method that it'll still grow despite having it so much soil on top of it. So I've been farming on my own since 2000. Other than that, I was always a helper or a labor source for my grandfather. He was the farmer, and I didn't have that responsibility of overseeing the farm from putting seed from cleaning the field to putting seed in the ground to harvesting. I was just a labor. And it wasn't until I went through my traditional Hopi wedding that my grandfather actually gave me a plot of farmland that he used. And he's told me that once you become married and have a family, it's a Hopi man's responsibility to provide corn for your family. So I've been planting on my own since 2000, and I've have some very successful years through the moisture and not so successful more recently because of climate change and lack of precipitation.
Thanks, Stewart. Do the planting so many seeds to begin with before you thin, does that also protect from the spring and early summer winds? Does it protect the clump?
Yeah, the reason why we plant in clusters like that is it's a protection element too from the winds, and they help support each other. Otherwise, with the strong winds that we get at home, it'll just crush, flatten the, if there's only one stalk, because there's no protection around and support from one another to hold that plant upright. So yeah, that's correct. It's also a method to help support the plant in itself from wind.
The picture on the bottom right that says wide spacing, they space, we were told 3 steps, but that was a really good winter. And I think the guys didn't do the full 3 steps because the ground had so much soil moisture in it. But that 3 steps and wide spacing is so each clump isn't competing with its neighboring clump for soil moisture. Yeah. Is that right?
The spacing is determined by how much moisture you have in your field. So it can vary from 4 to 6 steps. So when the young shoots come out, there's no competition surrounding that particular clump of corn plants. So there's a technique for that as well.
Thank you. Well, we, as a part of our project, there's many different dimensions to this project. And as I said, one of the main goals for the Hopi farmers was just to see if they could successfully grow corn in their ancestral homeland. We actually go out and document the growth and reproductive stages, and we have monitors to record precipitation, temperature, and soil moisture. You can see on the picture on the right, we're harvesting, and the CDG means it's the check dam garden, and it's clump 31. So that clump got a number so that we can track as we process the harvest and measure our yields, we can track it by each clump. That person in the middle has for most of the last 14 years has been the leader of this weekly recording that we do. That's an educator and researcher at Crow Canyon, Paul Ermigiati. The person on the left is Dan Simplicio, who's from Zuni Pueblo. And on the right, that's Reed Bruger, who's a volunteer from Cortez and a Hopi farmer next to him. We record all these different growth stages during the week. And do all this recording. We enter that into a database. We record damage by insects. We eventually measure the yields and we correlate the growth stage information with all the environmental data. By the way, that person on the lower right is Grant Coffey, the son of the bean farmer out in Dove Creek that Mike Coffey, who let us establish the field on his property. And I would say that our Hopi farmers, they tolerate us Anglos and all these measurements and recording and that we're doing, but that isn't what is most interesting and the reason why they participate. And they really do it because of this relationship they have to corn. So I'm going to play a video where Donald Dawahongnewa is talking about this to some Crow Canyon students, and he'll begin and when he's first talking, he's going to say, we don't think of these as numbers. And he's referring to us numbering this stuff and keeping track of these records. But what Donald says is going to go back to something that Hopi said about the relationship that Hopi people have to their corn.
When we look at our crops, like planting like this, we don't look at them as numbers. We look at them as our children, like you're our children. That's how we look at our plants. We treat them like that. And so when you go to your field, you sing a song, and your children will hear you sing, and they'll say, "Our dad is coming." Where? Then they'll tiptoe, try to look over the horizon, and that's how they grow, and that's how you grow.
So it's really beautiful, and it goes back to that notion. Part of what Donald told us about singing the song is that part about coming to your field with a good heart, and how important that is. And, just getting rid of any, any bad feelings you might have from anything that's gone wrong that day or something like that. So I'm not sure I'm describing that right, Stewart. Do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, that's a basic practice for all Hopi farmers, is that we consider plants to be our children, because at the early stage when they're young, the plants, young shoots, they're vulnerable to rabbits, to cutworms, and to lizards who may not have been privy to drinking water or even have that chance. So once those shoot comes up, it's the only moisture that is present on the field or on the landscape. So when I'm approaching my field too, even from when I'm leaving my home, I just start singing, because of that technique. And like Donald was saying, they'll hear your voice and they'll want to see you coming. So that's a way for them to, by stretching out to see when you're coming, it also adds to that growth. So so they're happy to see you. And it's just I can't explain the feeling when you come into your field and you see your children healthy, and you see dew on them, or from rainfall overnight, and just smell the soils, the plants, the tassels, even the pollen that's coming out. It's just there's no other experience in my opinion. And then you're looking forward to even protecting your children, and because you're reminiscing how good the corn tastes, when you bring it home, and the different types of food that's prepared from the corn. And that's probably one of the methods that I didn't really see eye to eye in terms with how Crow Canyon was conducting their research and their study and their, counting everything. And it was simply to calculate the yield of corn from the garden. And I keep telling Mark and Paul and the group at Crow Canyon, you have to. It's a necessary component of dry farming or farming, is that you have to taste the corn. The corn knows that it has a purpose to nourish your body, and by you not taking part or eating the corn, they feel sad, and they're just recorded and then kept in storage. And so we don't see eye to eye on that. And I'm always telling you, you need to go out there. You may do all your recording, but at least partake from the corn, and see for yourself, know for yourself how good corn tastes at its highest, at its freshness level. And so as far as I know, that still wasn't a practice that was happening at Crow Canyon. It's just strictly recording the yield of the corn that was being grown in the different gardens on campus and at the coffee's land in Dove Creek.
So we do measure yields, but we do now, since Stewart told us all of this, we do take several ears and eat the ears as we're harvesting them, the fresh ears, to do that part. And then I'll show you another slide later about, we used to just keep all the corn curated, but we've actually taken a lot of corn back to Hopi. So we'll talk about that. So Stewart, we are trying to honor that and at the same time get measurements on our yields. I don't want to spend too much time on this graph. The black line this is the yields from 2009 to 2019. Those are called box and whiskers plots. And they measure the variation between all the clumps in the individual gardens. You can see the different colors for each of the gardens. You can see that the Mike Coffee Garden is the yellow one, and it's typically the most productive. You can also see that our rainfall, we've done this experiment during what climate scientists say is the most severe mega drought in the last 2,000 years. And yet we've still gotten yields some years. Our worst year for precipitation was 2018, where we got barely 6.5 inches of rain. And our best year didn't even get above 15 inches. It was just almost 15 inches of rain in 2019. So we have, it's pretty amazing. And I think it goes back to the Hopi seed that we began with. We used the Hopi seed from the Hopi farmers the first year, and every year after that, we've been planting the seed from our harvests. So the seed that came out of our gardens, but it's all from that original Hopi corn. And I do think that Hopi over the millennia have created varieties that are particularly good at surviving with a limited amount of moisture. I think I'm going to skip this slide. It just talks about our yields. The Mike Coffee Garden is the most productive and is about 4 times more productive than the campus gardens. I'm gonna move past these data. There's many accomplishments besides the Pueblo Farming Project has many different dimensions to it, in addition to growing the fields. And a lot of different accomplishments. We've done a dozen of these public presentations about it. Educators, both Hopi educators and our Anglo educators at Crow Canyon have created curricula on corn farming for schools, and that curricula is aligned to the state standards. We made what I think is a really nice documentary film called More Than Planting a Seed about the project. And we've published research publications. And one of those research publications came from a study that was initiated by Hopi, where they asked us to do DNA analysis of modern Hopi corn. And that was partly about Hopi wanting to document their corn and maintain that integrity of those varieties through time, and having this DNA analysis as a baseline study of Hopi corn varieties. We worked with a woman named Kelly Schwartz, who was the geneticist that did this analysis. We got 16 varieties of Hopi corn from 6 different Hopi farmers. And that's the circle on the left is those colored dots are the different Hopi varieties that we got DNA from. The column on the left you can see is from other southwestern and Mexican varieties. And in general, the DNA shows that they all share DNA, but it clusters at different levels. And what you can see in the panel on the right is I've drawn a circle around those Hopi varieties, which cluster. They do form a distinct cluster within the larger cluster of southwestern and Mexican varieties. So that's really interesting that Hopi has that. And when we did this analysis with the laboratories, we made it clear that Hopi owns these data and they can only be accessed through permission of Stewart's office. But I think it's an interesting study that does provide Hopi with this baseline. And of course, there's many threats to, in modern times, to these varieties getting contaminated, I suppose. And I don't know if you want to talk about that today, Stewart. How many varieties are still being planted today? And is this genetic diversity threatened in your opinion, or is it being maintained?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how many varieties that are being planted because each family has their own needs and have their own uh, corn varieties that they take care of. But yes, it is being threatened, especially by genetic modified, engineering of corn, and there's companies such as Monsanto will, try to exploit this type of information for their own benefit and copyright it, for their benefit. So essentially, what would happen is that if by getting approval of this copyright, and they find that there's the Hopi seeds in our or strands of DNA in their varieties, they could go after Hopi for having these different strands and continue to plant these seeds without their permission. So it's I know it's not a fair system, but those are some of the threats as well. And the reason why we, as mentioned earlier with the researcher, we didn't want the person planting these different varieties in the kind of vicinity of the same location is because those strands will become mixed through pollination, and then also we safeguard our seeds too, because if you take seeds out from Hopi area and implant that in a garden somewhere else, you have and continue to water your garden, that seed will become used to receiving water that it's not used to, so it changes the DNA of that corn by you watering your garden. And so there are all kind of things that the Hopi tribe doesn't have resources to protect their varieties of corn in today's modern culture and atmosphere. I see packets of corn in like Home Depot or other gardening stores that say Hopi corn seed. So it's already happening. They're labeling these corn as being Hopi varieties, and we just don't have laws to protect these. And we welcome any suggestion or help in trying to protect these different varieties from coming into the hands of these multi-billion-dollar companies, who extract it and make money off other people's varieties. So there is a threat to these different varieties.
To try and back in the mid 1900s, they collected corn from indigenous people, and those are maintained by the USDA, and they grow them out occasionally. And what's interesting is they have these Hopi varieties. And this woman who did this study also compared the seed that she got from the Hopi farmers who donated to our project. She's done the DNA analysis of Hopi corn that comes from these USDA seeds, and there were differences between them. And I think that comes from what Stewart said, that when they grow those out in Iowa, I think that's where they do it, they water them. And so even though that's corn that came from Hopi in 1940, it's changed over the years, even though it's been curated in order to protect that germplasm. So it's really the Hopi farmers working in their fields that are maintaining the true genetic diversity of Hopi corn, and it's really important moving forward. I just wanted to point out this publication real quick. We have an ebook that's published on the internet, and that highlighted pfpcrowcanyon.org is where you can find it. It's a really good publication. We update it every year. And I think you would enjoy going there and looking at it. The educational curriculum and the documentary film is embedded in that ebook. And I think you'd enjoy looking at it. Nana, I know it's 10 to 6, and I don't know, we're not going to get to the Maize database project. I did want to close with saying that two of the most important accomplishments of the Pueblo Farming Project is we had a community meeting at Hopi where we presented this project to the Hopi community at the Kaikotsmavi Community Center that you can see in the upper left. And Joel Nicholas, one of the people that works for Stewart or in Stewart's Hopi Cultural Preservation Office, his mom and other women prepared a feast using the PFP corn for many of the dishes. And that's something people don't realize too, is how many different ways, delicious ways that Hopi and other Pueblo and other indigenous people prepare corn. But because of Stewart, you know, making us sensitive to this fact that we shouldn't just be storing all of this in containers. We brought the bulk of it, about 250 pounds of that corn, back to Hopi, and Stewart circulated it to various people at Hopi. And it was just really gratifying to see how happy people were to receive that corn. So maybe it's good to stop here. I don't know if you want to do some questions and answers, or not sure where we stand, Nana.
Yeah, we are just usually pretty open. I think people probably have some questions, and maybe because of the interest in the database, maybe you could just give a synopsis of it, and it may also become a question. And sometimes we use the chat, and otherwise people are also free to unmute and ask questions.
Well, all those the growth stages re-record and the yields are all available on that ebook. So they're easy for people to access to better understand how environment is. And, you know, I think we have hopes that this will provide important information for the future of this farming in this area of climate change that Stewart has been referring to, because we're really measuring how climate change is affecting this corn. So all of that ebook that I mentioned, and I could get you that link too, that you could share if people didn't have something to write it down with, Nana. But
yeah, I can also share it in the course, and it may actually be on the module already that I included. Yeah, thank you. There was a question from Liz, and the question was related to Hopi culture and farming, and the inclusion of males on the field, and I assume females more grinding and doing the culinary work. But can you, Stewart, maybe address this? How is that organized culturally? You mentioned it a little bit, but I think, Liz, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, there's different families have different methods, but it's not only strictly to the male. You know, when we go out, we bring our family along in female. And you know, in the video where you saw Hoyestewa, Harold, and Owen planting, usually the putting in of the seeds, where Hoyestewa put in, it's a girl, you know, a female that does that behind the male digging the hole. So it's a family effort, and we enjoy it. It takes a lot of time to do, and the more help you have on a given day, the more you are able to put seed into the ground. So it's not just a female, a male process, but it involves all family, young children, and even older who even go just for prayer, you know, and not necessarily work, but they're there and encouraging and thanking the people that are helping, and just be there and praying for rain and a good growing season. So it's all of that combined when you're growing and taking care of your corn. I took my daughter out there when she was small, and she, they'll help and for a while, and then they'll go out and play, which is fine, but at least they're out there spreading joy and happy thoughts out there through their playing, and not necessarily, helping out or giving a handing hand. So it's all about feeling of joy, harmony, at peace, and our corn plants have feeling too, so they'll soak that in and recognize your faith and your heart, and they'll try their best to produce a yield for the season. And so it's truly a different feeling when you're out there planting.
Thank you. Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? Anyone? I just have one question, and this links this topic a little bit more to food security and resilience. Also, when you think about the Hopi culture, can you speak, Stewart, to the young people, and how many would you say are young people engaged in this process and taking on the, as you mentioned it, the responsibility to grow corn for the family? Is it a very common piece for Hopi culture to pass this on, and are young people taking this as a responsibility?
I believe so, and I'll use my own family as an example. I've taken my son. I only have one son out there, and my nephews, and it's really about how they are raised. So there's a lot of Hopi families that don't participate in these types of activity because not only were they raised in cities, but they don't really have a connection to Hopi. They're only Hopi through enrollment. But you have to know your family, and I'm talking about my son. You have to know them and take them out there at an early age. That way, in Hopi, we say "Pumwe inangwa panhukiutang," meaning that when you do so, take them out at an early age. That's how their heart is set when they grow older. They want to be out there. They desire to be out there, and there's a funny story where we were hand planting, and I'm kind of getting old up in age, and he's much more faster than I am in planting, and he's like teasing me. It's come on, Dad, you're getting old, there's no breaks, and his mind just works that you have to get it done, so he's like, instead of me encouraging him to move, hustle, it's opposite, where it's like, come on, Dad, we got to finish this row, and that communication that you express between one another. And then a couple years, I took my youngest daughter out there too, with his little brother from his mom's sister's, her mom's sister's side, and they really enjoyed it. They're just out there. So the idea is to get them out there at a younger age, so that their heart is molded in that way that they need to be out there and help. Plus, the meals that we provide and the different types of dishes that is, it's so delicious, and we all enjoy that in the fall when we're sitting around the table, and we say to this was worth it. Just tasting that taste of Hopi corn in your mouth is all your heart. It's all worth it, and your hard work pays off, and the kids enjoy that too. And throughout the year, that you see the white corn there that's made into different types of food, and it's not just that one moment where in the fall that fresh corn. It's throughout the year that different types of food is prepared, and a really important part of our culture, such as baby naming and weddings and ceremony. So it all adds up, and to be a part of something like that only encourages them to participate further on.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you both for wonderful contributions today.
Good, I hope so.
Yeah, that was.
I want to thank Stewart. He, being able to share that relationship that Hopi people have to corn and to their other crops too is it's been a real important thing for us to learn and be able to pass on to the students that come to Crow Canyon. So thank you, Stewart.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stewart and Mark. And we're at the end of our course 2, so I will let you both go, and I have a few words here for our course 2 students to finish this part of grain school. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Stewart. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Quack, quack.
Quack, quack.